You are at the right place for this webinar titled Continuing the Conversation about Serving Students in Poverty. This is the second session in this series, and today we'll focus on good practices in using data and resources to benefit students. As others are joining us, we'll go over some housekeeping rules, but before we do that, let me just comment that I am so excited about this topic, and I'm extremely pleased with the response that we've had to providing information on this topic. For the first session of this series, we had over 450 registered. For this one, we have over 200 registered for the second session. So this certainly is a topic that's of interest to many institutions and hopefully will benefit many of their students. Okay, so housekeeping, as a few others join us today, you will receive an email that goes out to all registrants that will include the webinar recording, the slide deck, and all of the resources that we mentioned during the webinar. During the webinar today, you are encouraged to post your questions or comments. We'll be using the Q&A feature of Zoom. That's so that our staff can monitor that. They'll be responding to your questions as they can as we progress. We will have time for a Q&A at the end, which we can open some of your mics if we need to, if you'd like to have a conversation about some of the items that we talk about during today's webinar. Some of you are interested in a certificate of participation for 1 hour of continuing education. We're pleased to offer that. Just send an email to certificates@SmarterServices.com, and we'll be glad to get that certificate out to you. In the email that you receive after the webinar, there will be a link to a survey. It's just a satisfaction survey to let us know what you thought about this one and to give us some ideas for upcoming webinars as well. So for our current clients, we're glad you're here. We consider you family. It's good to be with you again. For those of you who are here today that are not our current clients, we're really glad that you're here today. These webinars are just something that we provide free to our clients as really a value-added benefit where we talk about issues and concerns to higher education institutions. What we're going to be doing today is, first of all, reviewing the framework that is the mindset that often emerges from living in poverty. We're not going to spend as much time on that as we did in the first session, but in case there are those who were not in the first session, we will give it a cursory review. Most of our time today will be spent exploring some good practices about serving students who have difficulties in meeting their basic needs. Most of the content we'll look at today are examples of good practice from Amarillo College. As I did a lit review about schools that do a great job with this, I kept seeing the name of Amarillo College. I did reach out to a couple of people there. They really regretted that they did not have a resource person who could be here with us live today, but they did share with us a video that you'll be seeing that's just great. And some of the people in the video, as well as a person you see on the slide deck, are no longer with Amarillo College. They've moved on to other institutions where they're still working in this role of serving students and meeting their basic needs. But since that center there is short-staffed, they didn't have anyone who could join us live today, but they certainly give us their full support, and they've provided lots of information that you're going to consider very practical today. And then after we look at that information from Amarillo College, I'm going to talk with you about how you can use non-cognitive factors. That's the data we collect with SmarterMeasure, how you can use that data to inform the conversations that you have with students who are living in poverty or who have insecurities regarding their basic needs. So what is this poverty framework that we're talking about? Well, first of all, you understand that no person is an island, right? We're all shaped, influenced by the communities that are around us. So whether you think of this framework, whatever label you put on it as a mental model, a worldview, a schema, a frame of reference, unconscious bias, whatever label you put on it, the norms, the rules of the cultures that we spend our time in influence us, perhaps in even ways that we're not really aware of. And one of the main ways they influence us is through our social economic strata. Well, the framework identifies different patterns of thinking that emerges after a person has spent considerable time in any of the three different socioeconomic strata. Now, let me issue a caveat, right? What we're about to talk about in this model, These are generalizations that most of the time ring true to some degree. But obviously, there are exceptions to persons at all three of these levels. There are people that live in the middle class that don't think and act like the norms of the middle class. There are people that live in wealth that don't act and think like that. There are persons who live in poverty that don't act and think like the norms typically spin. So, certainly, there are exceptions. So what we're talking about here are generalizations. So this is the framework. It comes from the work of Ruby Payne. She's referenced there at the bottom. She's published several books and articles about this. You can Google it, find lots of information about this. Certainly recommend further investigation of her resources to you. So the actual framework has about 15 different um, items that you see there on the left. For sake of brevity today, we're not going to talk about all 15. I'm just going to kind of review 6 of these kind of quickly, just so that to refresh your memory about what we talked about. So the way that the framework is displayed here is that you've got 3 different socioeconomic groups, right? Most of the people on this call, I'm assuming, operate from the middle class, right? A lot of us work at institutions of higher education. We've got good jobs. We're not wealthy. We probably have a budget and we're watching the money. I get paid once a month, and I know that toward the end of the month, it's getting tight, right? That's middle class, right? Most of us can relate to that. Um, Probably, and there I may be surprised. There may be a person or two on this webinar that live in the wealth class. And by this, I mean people who are really, really wealthy, multimillionaires. And most of the time, for all of these quadrants, you really are most impacted by the thinking if you've been in this socioeconomic strata for multiple generations. So we're talking about generational wealth here. And persons who, if they're third generation really wealthy, well, they're really going to think like a really wealthy person. Same thing is true for poverty. If you're multi generational poverty, you're going to think like that. Now, if you win the lottery, you may move immediately from poverty to middle class financially. But guess what? The norms and the patterns of thinking that people who have been wealthy for multiple generations, you're not going to have those, right? And that's very important. And we get that if you win the lottery, you're not immediately going to think like a person that's been wealthy for multiple generations. So that's going to be important in a moment as we're talking about serving persons living in poverty. So let's look at a few of these examples just to kind of understand what this framework is about. The first example is very visual. It's almost kind of humorous when you think about it, but it really helps us to see the differences in the way different people in different socioeconomic stratas think about things. So first of all, look at food. We're going to start with the middle class on each of these because for most of us, that's where we live. That's what we can relate to, right? Well, middle class, what's it like when we go out to eat? Well, we may go out to eat, and if I ask my wife, was that a good meal? What am I talking about? Well, I say, well, was it good? Was the quality of that meal good? That's how I judge its value. Now, if there's some point that we really splurge and we go to a nice restaurant, not too often, but if we were to do that, when we go there, the food's different in a really nice restaurant, right? The presentation of that food is what's important. I'm not a person that takes a lot of pictures of my food and posts it on Facebook. But if I went to a really nice restaurant and the presentation of that food was really beautiful, well, that might be one I take a picture of, right? Because the way I would judge that is by presentation of the food. Well, persons living in poverty, if you ask them what's a good meal, it's going to be one which the quantity is important. So think about those buffets, right? Those low cost buffets you go to where you can just eat and eat and eat, right? It's all about quantity. So that's just kind of a visual image that you can get to kind of see the differences in the way food is experienced differently in the different classes. Now, let's think about something a little bit more important than food. Driving forces. These are the factors that motivate us. And again, starting with the middle class, achievement and work. That's the framework we're coming from. That's what motivates us. And I'm eat up with this, people. I recently took the Strength Finders assessment, and my number one strength was achievement, right? And I enjoy work. That's just the way I'm made. I've raised up in multi-generational middle class. I value getting things done. I really enjoy working. Why? Well, part of it is that influence I've had over multiple generations in being in the middle class. Well, persons in wealth, guess what? They don't have to clock in at 8 o'clock. They're not going to work. They're already multimillionaires. They were born into this wealth, likely. So, what's important to them is not achievement, but what's important to someone in the wealth class are connections. It's how connected they are financially, politically, and socially. So think about, those wealthy families you see on the news, the movie stars, the whatever. It's who they know that's important, right? It's the connections. Now, for persons living in poverty, what's their driving force? It's not achievement, it's not connections, it's survival. When you don't have your basic needs met, when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, that's what you're thinking about, right? It's that pyramid of basic needs. And our basic needs at the bottom of that pyramid is going to be the main thing we're thinking about if those needs are not securely met. So, survival, relationships, especially with their immediate family, and entertainment, those are the driving forces for persons living in multi generational poverty. So, we can understand those differences. So now let's think about time, the way persons approach time. Well, for persons in the middle class, future is very important, right? The decisions that we make today, I'm trying to teach my daughter, in fact, that's her calling right there, trying to teach my daughter to plan ahead. She's in college, and I want her to do well in college because the decisions she makes today really affect her tomorrow, right? So it's the future that's important. Well, in the wealth class, guess what? It's not so much the future. Their future is sort of taken care of. It's the past, it's traditions that are important. It's the decisions being made on the basis of history and decorum. Well, for persons living in multi-generational poverty, well, guess what's important? It's the present. It's that survival mode. Decisions are based on what they need to survive. Now, where we're going with all of this is how a person living in these classes approaches higher education. So begin to think about, persons, most of our students that come to our universities, our community colleges, may be middle class. So it's easy to motivate them with the future to work hard to get that degree that matches their thinking. But what about persons living in poverty, right? They're struggling for the present. So we'll talk about that more in just a moment. How about money? Well, for those of us in the middle class, we've got to manage it, right? We've got a budget, and we're watching that bank account as the end of the pay period gets close. We're managing our money. Well, persons in the wealth class, they're conserving their money, they're investing their money, hopefully, they're donating their money. But for persons living in generational poverty, money is something that's spent at the moment because it's needed. You don't have very much of it. So when you get it, you spend it kind of quickly. So you see there how the framework about money is different. Destiny. This one's really important. Later in the webinar, we're going to be talking about locus of control being one of the things that we measure with SmarterMeasure. But destiny for the middle class is that we believe in choice, that we can change the future by good choices now, right? So if we work hard, if we choose to work hard, if we apply ourselves, we'll be rewarded with that. Well, for persons in the wealth class, their destiny is to hopefully be responsible, to be generous, to use their wealth to build those connections, to establish and maintain that good name and that reputation that their family has. And then, of course, for persons in generational poverty, well, it's more of a belief in fate that really you can't do much because no matter what happens, it never works out bad. That's the way it's always been. You can't do much to mitigate chance. And then finally, and really where all of this is going, is how do persons in the different classes view education? Well, for us in the middle class, it's critical, right? Especially those working in higher ed, we're making the case that a degree really will help you climb that success ladder, right? That's the rationale that we give. Well, for persons living in wealth, education is good, but what's really good about it is making the connections. And so super wealthy people go to the Ivy League schools where it's all about who else is going there and what school can you say you went to, right? But regrettably, and the whole reason why we're having this conversation today is that for persons living in multi-generational poverty, education is, while it's valued, it's just an abstract, right? It's not something that's the reality for them because of the situation they live in. For years, one of our mottos here at Smarter Services has been that one of the best ways to break the cycle of poverty is through higher education. We firmly believe that. And that's why when I was exposed to this framework recently, I was like, oh, I've got to share that with our clients because this mental model really will help us as we have qualitative conversations with our students, regardless of which social class they live in. Now, what does this tiger have to do with all of this? Those of you who have been SmarterMeasure clients for a while probably have heard me say, you can't change a tiger's stripes, but you can teach a tiger to hunt in a different environment. And that's a very important concept in what we're talking about today, that the purpose of this conversation, the purpose of understanding this framework so that we can help students is that we are not trying to change a student. We value that student, regardless of which one of those social economic strata they come in. We're not trying to change that student. We're trying to help that student understand how that a student like them can be successful in higher ed. So with a tiger, we're just holding a mirror up to that tiger so that that tiger can see its stripes. We're not trying to change the tiger's stripes. We're trying to teach it how to hunt in this jungle that is higher ed. By the way, while I've said that phrase for years, just today, I used generative AI to generate this message. I said, create for me an image of a tiger hunting on a college campus. That's what it came up with. See the columns of the building back there? So that's kind of neat now that I have a visual image to visually illustrate that concept that we've talked about for years. So now with that framework in mind, remember all of that as we look at some of these great practices from Amarillo College. They got started doing this over a decade ago. They noticed in their community of Amarillo there was a growing trend of poverty, educational attainment was decreasing. So they got together and they created what they called the No Excuses Poverty Initiative. They did have a grant that kind of kickstarted it, but what they put together was an institutionally supported systematic approach that's institution-wide, which is very important. And out of that, they developed 4 primary programs: social services, a food pantry, a mentoring program, and a career center. Now, I could tell you more about what they do, and I will in just a moment, but seeing them explain it is where the real power is. So we're about to watch a video that they provided. It's 10 minutes long, and you may want to go grab a tissue. I've seen this video more than once, and when I watched it again this morning, I got to tell you, I teared up a little bit. And if you tear up a little bit, that's okay too. All that means is that you care about students. And I'm telling you, if you're here for this second session of the webinar, I know you care about students. So let's watch this video about how Amarillo College cares about their students as well.
It's a city formed in the wide open spaces of the Texas High Plains in the heart of the Northern Panhandle, Amarillo. And it's growing a reputation for opening its heart to students who often get left behind on the road to a higher education.
Our driving vision is that we will love the students we have, not the students we wished we had or thought we had. Embrace who's on your campus, and it really starts with listening to your students.
That's at the heart of the transformation happening at Amarillo College. It's the city's 2-year community college with 10,000 students. Dr. Russell Lowry Hart is its president.
For us, that reformation started by listening to our students and asking them what the perfect college was for them, and then building ourselves to be that college. Any institution in the country can do that.
Lowry Hart knew Amarillo College staff had to listen and change because the status quo wasn't working. The school data on college graduation and the transfer rates to 4-year colleges was grim.
And we were really shocked. We thought we were better than we were. But we functionally had a 13% completion and transfer rate combined. That's not worthy of our community. That's not worthy of our students. So that data point is what launched our movement to understand who our students were and how we could love them more effectively.
Lowry Hart started surveying students to see why so many couldn't complete their associate's degrees.
It wasn't academic issues, it was all life issues. The top 10 barriers our students identified were life issues: healthcare, food, housing, transportation, childcare, utility payments. Our students were telling us repeatedly that they were dropping out of school because their car broke down or they lost their childcare.
How can you expect your students that have kids to come to your class when they can't put their children in childcare?
A citywide study showed that less than a third of Amarillo residents had a post-secondary education.
The majority of our community is living in the war zone of poverty.
27 is the average age of students at Amarillo College. They are mostly women, often mothers, attending part-time, working at least 2 jobs, and barely making ends meet. The majority are first-generation students, and they want to be acknowledged.
They wanted us to see them. Our students were seeking relationships and service and support, and what we were offering was bureaucracy, acronyms, and paper. I knew that the college had to rebuild itself around the students we had.
They are students like Dolores McMurray, a mother of 4 and a grandmother, who was losing jobs and promotions because she didn't have a college degree.
For a minute, you think you're not good enough. But I know better. I know better. I so know better. Maybe not good enough for you, but I am good enough.
And motivated enough to return to college in her early 50s and major in business management while living with a disability and living on the edge financially. Amarillo College has created a culture of caring to help low-income students like Dolores far beyond financial aid. In 2012, college faculty launched a No Excuses Poverty Initiative.
What No Excuses functionally means is instead of inflicting a painful, pull yourself up at the bootstraps metaphor on our students, it means that we hold ourselves accountable with no excuses. So in higher education, if you remove excuses from the work that you're doing, then it doesn't matter if the high school prepared them. It doesn't matter if the students come to your report. Then you have to build systems to address that barrier. And that work has been incredible.
That work at Amarillo College includes more tutoring assistance for students, poverty training for all faculty, and an early alert system with engaged instructors tuned into students' needs.
And they can click their early alert and say, this student's got a transportation barrier or a childcare barrier, and that will automatically go to our social workers and they will intervene.
Social workers oversee a 2-year-old advocacy and resource center, the nucleus of the Poverty Initiative, where Dolores and many others receive help.
Hi, good to see you.
We provide traditional tuition and textbook scholarships along with childcare assistance and transportation assistance in the form of gas reimbursement.
The Advocacy and Resource Center, also called the ARC, has a food pantry, a clothing closet, and oversees an emergency fund from the Amarillo College Foundation. The fund helps students pay for things like car repairs, utility payments, and rental assistance. And staff connects students to community resources, too.
Hello, Miss Joe. How are you?
Although Dolores works at a bingo parlor and has even worked 2 jobs at times to pay bills, she says her college dreams would have ended without support from the ARC.
You have no idea how much I thank you guys. Many days I didn't know how I was going to make it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. The warmth and just home.
Yeah.
This is really like home. They help my spirit. They help my heart. They help just my whole mindset. They didn't make you feel this little. They made you feel this big. Even when I was low on food or with my rent, when I lost my job and didn't know how everything was, I had my rent paid.
Emergency funds have kept Edward Pena from dropping out of college. He works at a nursing home, but he's also working on an associate's degree in nursing at Amarillo College and plans to become a doctor. His father always told him,
"You need to go to school. Education is the best. That's going to take you anywhere. You know, it's going to open doors."
Edward's fiancée, Laura, is in college with him, also getting a nursing degree. With college tuition for two and a baby girl, money is tight.
So they helped us with transportation money. They helped us with daycare money, which is quite a bit.
And through the No Excuses Poverty Initiative, Amarillo College paid a month of the couple's rent.
We're so fortunate to be in a college that really cares for you, that wants to see you succeed. They want to watch you succeed. So you're not just a number, you're a student that is going to succeed.
Our future of our country depends on our ability to educate every student in our community. We can't survive economically as a country with skill sets that are based in a high school diploma, as important as that step is. And the future of higher education rests on our ability to love the lowest income students, the most at-risk students, to success, and rebuilding ourselves so that they can actually lead our communities forward.
Time reveals a new story of student success at Amarillo College in light of the new poverty initiatives. Students' completion rates have tripled.
And I'm proud to say that in 2017, our completion rates were 45%.
And it's close to graduation time for Edward Pena, a day when he will make his father proud.
I'm very excited for him to be in the stands, waiting to hear my name be called.
Even my grandchildren want to do it.
Dolores' grandkids already want to follow in her footsteps. She's close to graduation day, too.
I will probably be bawling. I may bawl before then. I may bawl today. Just having that degree, knowing that you accomplished something this big, this is huge. This is amazing.
Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed seeing that video about what they're doing at Amarillo College. You know, when you saw President Lowry Hart there, and one of his comments was that persons living in poverty that don't have their basic needs met, one of the things that they really crave is just to be seen. Well, that phrase "to be seen" comes from an experience of his a few years ago when he actually did a social experiment. He went to another city. He went to Waco, Texas, where he adorned himself as a homeless person, lived on the streets of Waco for an entire weekend just to see what that was like. And one of the things he wrote in the story I read about it was that there was a Sunday morning. He was there on the street. A family, obviously clothed to go to worship, walked by, but they would not look at him. So he cried out, "Please look at me. I'm a university president," which of course they probably thought he'd lost his mind. But he really was a university president. And so he really cares about this and just as passionate about this and started this program. So lots of kudos to him and the work he started and the work they're continuing there at Amarillo College. Now, one of the things that was referenced in that video was that obviously while the college wants to provide a lot of advocacy and resources, there are many other resources that are available to students. So they're at that link that you'll see, and we'll send out this slide deck so you'll see this link. But I want to take you to a page that's on their website. Well, if I can get my little, let's see if I can move it down a little bit. There we go. I want you to see this page from the Advocacy and Resource Center. And for all these categories, there's a drop-down menu, and there's lots of different resources, childcare resources. They're available in their community, right? Affordable clothing resources. There they are. What are these resources doing? They're teaching that tiger how to hunt, right? They're equipping that tiger with the tools that it needs to hunt in this jungle of higher education and be successful. And that's something that your school, if it hasn't already, you can emulate this. You can do an environmental scan to see what are the different resources in our community that are available to our students, and let's make them easily accessible through a page on our website, right? Um, just take some effort to do that, but it will be so helpful to the student, because going back to the mindset, when a person lives in generational poverty and their historical mindset, right, is not one about thinking about the future, not one about looking for other resources, they're not equipped with this knowledge. So equipping those students with the knowledge of the resources available could be what it takes to make a lot of the difference. One of the things that President Larry Hart referenced in that video was their top 10 student needs. So I wanted to share that with you. This is what they found. And as you look at this list, think about at your institution. How closely parallel is this list to what your students experience? Obviously, there's financial need. Some of that your school may be able to help with, especially if you get grants. But helping the students go through that complicated federal financial aid process. As I said, I've got a daughter in college. I've got a PhD in higher education leadership. And guess what? It was complicated for me to fill out the FAFSA, right? So, how can someone that's a first generation college student that has no frame of reference, no awareness about how the federal financial aid policies, how all that works, how can they hunt in that jungle, right? So, helping those students navigate that and get the federal financial aid first that they qualify for, that goes such a long way. Other basic needs are shelter. I read about great things that are happening with the community colleges in California, because they realize that many of their students live in their vehicles, right? So, what many of them have done is they've selected a parking lot on their campus. They've built a fence around that parking lot, not to keep people out, but to keep people in. So, what happens is students that are living in their vehicles come into the parking lot. They know that the gates are going to close and be locked at a certain time of night. I think it's like at 11 o'clock at night. And so the people parked, sleeping in their cars, can feel safe because they're in a gated, well lit parking lot. Those parking lots also are adjacent to a building where they have access to the restrooms. They set up a tent there where they've worked out programs with different pizza places in the community that they'll bring pizzas by there in the evening. So they're providing some food, they're providing a safe place to park their vehicle, they're providing restrooms. And so that's something that community colleges in California are doing for persons that don't have shelter. They're living in their vehicles, right? So many students need transportation assistance, childcare, utilities, the food pantry that you saw there on the video. So many needs, and probably your students have very similar needs as well. So here's some slides that they provided from Amarillo College. What are their top 6 interventions that they're doing for these students? First of all is the social services. You saw the name of the ARC, the ARC is the Advocacy and Resource Center. We know what resources are. Those are the tangible things you give out. But advocacy is what begins it, right? It's being an advocate for the student because they may not know how to hunt in this jungle of higher ed. You saw the food pantry. I love the name of what they call their mentoring program because their name conveys their heart, right? It's called the Coaches and Champions Mentoring Program. The coaches are the faculty, the advisors, the people who are talking to the students. And what do they call their students? That's their champions, right? These students want to be not only seen, they want to be valued. So in this program, they're presented as a champion, that if you overcome these barriers, you are a champion. So their mentoring program is called Coaches and Champions. I just love that. They've got the career and employment services there. The early alert system, I wanted to say something about that here on this next slide. There you see Kara Crowley. She actually was one of the leaders there. She too has recently left Amarillo College. She's now also up in Austin. I'll say something about Austin in just a moment. But most of your schools probably have an early alert system that, based on engagement data or based on early academic success data, flags students at being at risk of dropping out, right? So you probably got those. And some of the things that you're looking at are some of the first bullets there of academic dishonesty or behavioral mental health concerns, disability services, low grades or low attendance. But look at that fifth bullet. That's something that is a part of the early alert system at Amarillo College that may not be a part of the early alert systems at many institutions. And those are the social services needs, right? But man, you think about that. When you look at the data, you know that so many students drop out of higher ed because their basic needs aren't being met. And if you're hungry and you don't have childcare and you don't have transportation, it's those life factors that are going to make you drop out. Well, we need to be raising the red flag for students that have those needs. And so that's why social services need is one of the data points that goes into their early alert system. So there's different ways that students can receive assistance. They could be referred through that early alert, or the advisors that are counseling the students, if they become aware of these needs, can refer them. Faculty members as they're dealing with the students, other staff persons as they're dealing with the students, or students can even self-refer themselves there to the ARC. Now, I'm just a guy that cares about people. I care about student success. I'm passionate about non-cognitive data, being able to help these students. I am not an expert in assisting students with their basic needs. I'm just trying to increase awareness. But you know what? There are people who are experts in this, and they're all going to be getting together in Austin later in April. And so I want you to know about this. President Lowry Hart is associated with this. Kara is associated with this. It's going to be April the 24th and 25th. It's called the Trellis Basic Needs Summit. They're going to be getting together for 2 days and talking about this very issue of what can we do. So I've been really impressed with the emails that I've gotten from several of you after this first webinar saying, wow, this topic really is of relevance and importance, and we're passionate about it. Some have even said these are steps that my school is going to take. Well, if your school can consider maybe sending somebody to this event in Austin in April, that would be tremendous, right? You'd learn so much. So just want to make you aware of that. Of course, that link there will be available in this slide deck as we send it out afterwards. So let me catch a breath and let me launch a poll here. Let's see if I can get back to my controls and poll and launch. Okay, so what this poll is doing is I would kind of like to hear from you. So we just looked at the list of the different interventions that Amarillo College is doing. And so on this poll, you can choose more than one, choose all of those that apply, but the degree to which you're aware of it right now. What are the interventions that your school is currently using, right? And this is not scientific. It doesn't matter if you're not aware of all of them. But what do? Do you provide a centralized office or a center for assisting students with basic needs? That's been a huge part of the success of Amarillo College. And you saw the center there on that video. You saw the people walk into that center and they were hugging the staff there. And they really are the advocates for the students. Now, they did get a grant that helped start that center. Maybe there's grant programs you can apply to. There may be industries in your local community that really are suffering because they don't have enough entry-level workers. Well, if you go to those industries and say, look, we're going to help people get this associate degree, or we're going to help them get this bachelor's degree so they can be better employees for you. So could your organization help us start a center? Maybe that would be an idea. Training advisors and faculty, stocking a food pantry. That's becoming more common. My daughter that is in college in a sorority, that's one of the social projects that her sorority does is they raise money and they also donate clothes. One thing I've learned about sorority sisters is they have a lot of clothes. And so they can donate some of those clothes to the clothing closet, have a food pantry they raise money for, just increasing awareness of the institution and community sponsored services. That's that website that we talked about, assistance with financial aid. I love this idea about distributing unused meal plan dollars to students with basic needs, or allowing students to donate some of their meal plan funds, right? That money's already been paid. Don't let it go to waste. Don't use it as profit for a university that's likely a not-for-profit institution. Divert that funds to people that really need it. And then the last bullet there is does your institution currently have conversations with learners that are struggling with their basic needs about how their mindset and their individual attributes may be impacting their college experience? Okay, so we've had lots of people vote. I'm going to end this poll, and I hope that you see it. I'm going to take a look at it here before we end it. Looks like providing assistance with financial aid is a leader. Stocking of food pantries a close second. The distributing unused meal plans is probably the least used. So let me end the poll and share the results. And I think you guys are seeing this now.
Yes,
And
I
we'll
can
share.
confirm we are.
Okay, great. And we will share the results of that unscientific quick poll as we follow up with our resources. But I think it's kind of interesting to see what your schools are doing and what you're not doing. Those are good practices. So I'll stop that now, and then we'll move on. Okay, so how can SmarterMeasure be used to inform and enrich the conversations that schools are having with students, that maybe these students have been identified through that early alert process, or maybe they've been referred by an advisor? How can you use SmarterMeasure data? Well, most of you are our clients, and you know what SmarterMeasure is. Some of you are not, so let me briefly explain. SmarterMeasure is an assessment that students take. Sometimes it's put in the admissions process. Very often it's in an orientation course. Sometimes it's in a first year experience plan. Sometimes it's put in an early academic course like English 101. Schools put it lots of different places. But what it's measuring are non-cognitive attributes about the student. That's their levels of motivation, their control over procrastination, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, time management, availability of computing resources, skills with using computer sources, skills with reading on screen, all of those things. That's not how smart they are, it's who they are and what's going on in their life, right? So SmarterMeasure is measuring those things about the student. SmarterMeasure is not identifying students living in generational poverty, but what it's doing is you can use the data from it to inform and to enrich conversations that your advisors, your first year experience people, your faculty members are having. So here's a screen that we kind of breezed past because we were running out of time in the first session, but I want to take a little bit deeper dive here. What's there on the left are the SmarterMeasure variables. So for your schools that are using SmarterMeasure, you've got this data for each student. You've got a quantitative metric of their degree of this variable, right? And if they are low on this variable, boy, you really need to have a conversation with them about it. And I put my little AI generated picture of my tiger there again, because remember that, right? You cannot change a tiger's stripes, but you can teach a tiger to hunt in a different environment. We are not trying to change students who are living in generational poverty. We're not trying to change their mindset. We're not trying to change their stripes, because you know what? When they're on your college campus, even if you've got something as wonderful as the ARC that they do at Amarillo College, they're going to walk out of that resource center and they're going to go back home. And they're going to be in that environment. They're going to be influenced by that mindset. You don't have the power as an institution to change that. So we're not trying to change the student. We're trying to hold up a mirror to the student and say, okay, how can a student like you, how can a person who's lived in generational poverty, who at no fault of your own has developed patterns of thinking that are often friction points with the patterns of thinking that higher ed is based on, because the rules of higher ed come from the norms of middle class, right? What are the things we value in higher ed? Oh, we love deadlines, don't we? We put deadlines on everything. We put in our syllabus what you got to do week 1 and week 2 and week 3. We love time management. We love all of these things we're about to look at. That's the way higher ed is built. Am I saying we need to change higher ed? No. Am I saying we need to change the student? No, we need to teach the student how to hunt in this jungle of higher ed using these metrics, using this data that we've got about the student. So what does that look like? Well, how about control over procrastination? Persons living in generational poverty very often are prone to procrastinate. Why? Because their mindset is survival. They're worried about today. So something that could be put off till tomorrow very likely will be put off till tomorrow. That's their mindset. We're not saying they're a bad person. We're saying the culture, the norms that they've been raised in kind of promote procrastination. So when they come to us as a student, what are we going to talk to them about in that conversation? Well, we can just talk about this phenomenon about procrastination and how it may be natural for them and kind of help them to see that there is a timeline used in the higher education courses, right? There are some things going to be done at certain times. Talk about what's going on in their life between now and the next deadline they've got on a course assignment. Have a practical conversation about, okay, when am I going to find time? When am I going to start on this specific assignment? You may be teaching them a skill that they've never used before, and it may be a game changer. How about this one? Availability of an appropriate place to study. Very likely that persons living in generational poverty are living in a household, if they have a house, that has multiple people living in it, likely does not have high-speed internet, may not have computing devices in it. It's not a great environment to learn, right? So what can you offer them? Well, probably, and most college campuses I've ever been to and worked on have got spaces that are designed for students to study. These may be carrels in the library. There may be other areas on your campus that set up as study areas. These students may not be aware of those. They may not have thought about the fact that I can go to this place and study, that I don't have to study at home. Could be a game changer. Willingness to ask for help. Persons living in generational poverty likely have had bad experiences in the past with authority figures not wanting to help them, but wanting to, not help them. What you've got to convey, and what Amarillo College has done a great job of conveying through their ARC, is that we're here and we care about you. We are going to be your advocate. So when you need help, if you may not be comfortable going directly to your faculty member, come to us. Let us go to that faculty member with you. Let us talk to you about how you can talk to that faculty member. Whatever the path forward is, let someone at your institution be that advocate, the person that the student is not afraid to reach out to help to. Another data point we collect is about technical competency and technical knowledge. Very good chance that someone living in poverty may not have a computing device appropriate for doing coursework with them. Now, they probably have a phone, one of these, and there are lots of things we can do with our learning management system on a phone, right? But there are some things we can't do, right? It's not great to compose a paper. You can't take a test. At some point, you got to have a computing device. Well, I know your school's got computing labs, and just making these students aware of those resources could be a game changer. Availability of time to study. Remember that mindset, that framework rather, when we were talking about time and how it's viewed differently across the socioeconomic strata, time management. When you are living in generational poverty and it's day to day, what am I going to eat? Day to day, how am I going to get transportation? Day to day, I need some shelter, right? That's where your mind is. And so planning about when you're going to study, that's not at the top of the list. So what conversations can your academic advisors, your social advocates have with the student when they've got a measurement of that student's availability of time? Well, maybe just sitting down with a calendar and going through an exercise of, okay, here's my week. I know you're working 2 jobs. We're not trying to change that. We're accepting that. We love you, even though you work 2 jobs and go to school. But with those 2 jobs, where can we find some time and plan that on a calendar? That may be the first time that they've done an exercise like that. Those of us in middle class, that's second nature to us, right? But to persons living in poverty, it's not second nature. And that's the main thing we're communicating through this webinar, is that persons living in generational poverty don't naturally think and act in ways that are congruent with the norms that we have in higher ed. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. Doesn't mean they can't be successful. It just means they need to have some coaching, right? They need to see that they too can be a champion after talking to their coach. How about reason for continuing your education? We saw that on the framework, right? Those of us in middle class, we know the reason. We've got the motivation. We've seen people go to college. We've seen people get great jobs after going to college, right? The persons living in poverty, they've never seen it modeled. You see this, the next one here, support from family and friends. I loved that lady who in that video that went back to school in her 50s, and she was about to graduate. And did you hear what she said? She said, now my grandchildren want to do it too. Think about that. The first person in her family to go to college. And what's it doing? It's influencing others. When you've grown up in generational poverty and nobody in your family has ever gone to college, or they've never been successful going to college because they weren't appropriately supported, it doesn't seem like the thing you ought to do, right? But if you can help one person in a family be successful and they see how it changes it, you literally could be taking that whole family out of the cycle of generational poverty. That's what we're here for. That's what educators want to do, right? Perception of academic skills. It may be that they've never really had good success academically. So be their advocate. Help them get that first passing grade. Man, if they make a C, let's have a party, right? Maybe if you've got a success center like Amarillo College had at the end of semester when grades come out, have a pizza party, and everybody that passed their class, they get to come have some pizza. Celebrate academic success, because there's a chance they've never had it celebrated. And there's a chance when they go back to their home and the norms of their home that it's not going to be valued. Nobody may be patting them on the back when they get home. So we need to be the one that supports students. Time management, we've obviously already talked about that one. Persistence, sticking to it. And remember, with SmarterMeasure, you've got a quantitative metric of all of these things that tells you, that identifies the students that are low in these areas. And the last, on-screen reading, we get that, but the last one there is what I think is at the heart of this whole issue, and that's locus of control. That's kind of a psychological construct. You may or may not be familiar with it. What it means is that I have very high or internal locus of control. I feel like if I want to set my mind to do something, I can do it and it'll work. But a person with low or external locus of control feels like no matter how hard they try, the system is against them. And you know why they feel that way? Because that's the pattern they've observed for generations in their family. So persons coming from generational poverty very likely may have a very low locus of control number. And like I said, SmarterMeasure doesn't identify persons living in generational poverty, but this one variable, if you look at your people who are scoring low on locus of control and correlate that to those of lower socioeconomic status, I think you're going to find a very high correlation there. So that's how you can use SmarterMeasure data that you've got the scores on to enrich the conversations that your academic advisors, your success coaches, your faculty members, your admissions people, whomever is front facing with a student can use this data to have those meaningful, game-changing conversations, which doesn't strive to change the tiger stripes, but it's teaching the tiger how to hunt in this environment. Let me say, as I was putting this together, I was very sad that Amarillo College did not have a person available to help, but it was difficult to find schools that are examples of excellent practice in this. We'd love to continue the conversations. So I need resource people. I need examples of this. So if your school is excelling at this, even in just one area, Amarillo College, boy, they're knocking it out of the park. Maybe your school isn't at their level, but maybe there's something you've done a good job of. Maybe you're stacking a food pantry. That's awesome. Maybe you've got a clothing closet. Maybe you're doing whatever, and you'd love to share with your colleagues how you did that. Reach out to me. My email is right here on the screen, mac@SmarterServices, and say, hey, I'll be glad to share that. If I get some people that say I will share, we're going to have another one of these webinars the third Wednesday of next month. But if I don't hear from anybody, we're not going to have one. But you all can go to that meeting there in Austin in April and learn more about it. So we've got about 6 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to pause here and let my colleagues who've been monitoring that see, are there any questions that we need to talk about?
Hey, Mac, I've got, we did have a comment earlier. I think everybody could see that, but essentially the president is no longer at Amarillo College, the person you referenced, now at Austin State Community College. So that was just several months ago, last summer. Just wanted to make that call out. So thank you for the person who brought that up, but also had an inquiry or question about grants, any resources that we know of, or how schools would go about writing grants, where they might research where to find those. I know that that's what Amarillo College originally started. So just that was one of the questions.
Yeah, super question, because it takes funding to do this, right? And so if some of your schools are aware of grants, that's why I mentioned one of the things I did when I was working at a university as a part of the Chancellor's Fellowship, and I spent a semester going out talking to employers in our area. And I said, okay, what do you need from our employees? And how can you help us? And so even if there's not federal grants, think about local partnerships with industry as a way to raise some funding, because who's going to benefit from your graduates? It's your local employers, right? So try to bridge that gap is one way. If some of you know some federal grants, email me that. I'll include that in this, our emails that we're sending out following up, or we can talk about it in the next webinar. Certainly, I would think if you go to that meeting in Austin in April, that they'll be talking about that, because they are the experts. I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody that cares about students. Yeah, I was aware that President Lowry Hart is now up there in Austin, and Kara, that you saw her picture, also is there in Austin now. And guess where they're having this event? In Austin. So Austin is becoming the source of truth about this. So glad that they're doing more than keeping it weird in Austin. They're keeping it helpful.
That's funny. And we had another question, Mac, in particular about SmarterMeasure. The question, we had two different comments or questions, but essentially it's centered around when that would be delivered to students and how that would happen, like what we've done, and some generalizing, but that's the gist of what both of those questions were asking.
Yeah, so we don't dictate where a school administers the assessment. There's lots of great places where they put it in the student experience. Most often it happens very, very early in the student experience. One of the things that's beautiful about the SmarterMeasure data is that these non-cognitive factors, and we've done research we've been doing this now for 22 years, right? We've got data from over 7 million students. I'm confident this data is meaningful. I'm confident this data is predictive of students who are very likely to drop out early in their experience. Because when the deck is stacked against you, when you don't have that control over procrastination, you're not motivated, and you don't have the technical skills, that's when the straw breaks the camel's back and you drop out. So schools position this very early, so often in admissions, sometimes in a first year experience program, sometimes in a new student orientation course, or sometimes in a very early academic course, because this data can be collected and you can identify at-risk students before you ever give them a chance to fail. Now, the early alert systems that we talked about are great, and I hope your school is using them. If you've got an LMS like Blackboard or Canvas, and the student's not logging in, or the student's not engaging, or they're failing their first test, that early engagement and success data is critical. But guess what? You've allowed the student to fail before you've identified them. Using SmarterMeasure data early on, maybe even before they take their first class, you can identify high-risk students and be an advocate for them before they ever start their first class. So in answer to your question, you can place it wherever you want to. I suggest placing it very early in the admissions process, not as a gatekeeper to say you can't come in, but as a tool to say, hey, help us help you. We want to get to know you because you're becoming our student, and we're going to use this data to help you.
Thanks,
About
Mac. I don't see anything else, but I did want to add one thing to what you said. Carol and I, we would love to, for those of you who are interested, to learn a little bit more On occasion, we do provide trial logins and let people take the assessment and try it out. So again, if that's something you're interested in or want to share with us your QEP, your initiatives, we would love if what we have is not a good fit, we have a lot of other good resources or people that we know that we can connect you with, and we would love to do that because, as Max stated, we are all extremely passionate about this, and we've all been really well educated about this in the past year. And so that was some things that we didn't always necessarily know. So we're learning right along with you guys.
Okay, so for the record, we are ending this webinar exactly at the top of the hour. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.